There is something deeply wrong with the olive oil in your kitchen. Medieval peasants had better olive oil than you do, and they knew it. People who died young by our standards, who had no hospitals, no antibiotics, no pharmaceutical industry, understood something about this one ingredient that modern food science took until 2005 to put a name on. And the industry that sells you olive oil today would very much prefer you never learned what that thing was. In 2005, a research team made a discovery about real olive oil that should have changed everything. It did not, and the reason it did not is the story this video is actually about. In 1025, a Persian physician named Ibn Sina completed the most influential medical encyclopedia the medieval world ever produced, and in it, he prescribed olive oil as a frontline medicine for fever, joint pain, and skin disease. That was one data point from one physician. But it was not only one physician, it was every major medical tradition that existed before the industrial era. The Catholic Church spent centuries controlling olive oil production across southern Europe. Monasteries maintained their own presses and treated the harvest window like a medical supply deadline. Communities in medieval Andalusia, Umbria, and Crete organized their entire agricultural calendar around a single ingredient. These were not people who agreed on much. Different faiths, different languages, different centuries. But they agreed on this. That means there was something inside real olive oil that every one of those traditions understood and protected with the urgency of people who had watched what happened when it was gone. Something that the modern food industry has quietly processed out of your bottle without putting it on the label. Something that a research team confirmed in a peer-reviewed journal in 2005 that should have made international headlines, but did not. Why did that knowledge need guarding at all? And what happened when the people who inherited it decided that shelf life was worth more than whatever they were protecting? Stay with me, because the answer is already in your kitchen. Here's what was done to that knowledge. In 2010, researchers at UC Davis ran the first study of its kind at an American academic institution. They pulled extra virgin olive oils directly off supermarket shelves in California and sent them to an accredited laboratory in Australia for blind testing. No brand names, no labels, just the oil. 69% of imported brands failed international standards for extra virgin olive oil. They ran a follow-up in 2011. 73% of the top-selling imported brands failed the sensory panel tests set by the International Olive Council. The industry knew these numbers. They did not change the product. They changed the marketing. Nearly 3/4 of the most popular imported olive oils being sold to American consumers as extra virgin could not meet the basic definition of what extra virgin means. Now think about what that number represents in your own kitchen. Think about how many bottles you have bought, how many years you have been cooking with something you were told was premium, healthy, Mediterranean sourced. Think about the salads, the sautéed vegetables, the bread you dipped it into while believing you were doing something good for your body. Your body, it turns out, is not fooled by those labels. Your cells process what is actually in the bottle and not what the label promises. When what is in the bottle is refined, degraded, or blended oil masquerading as extra virgin, your body handles it the same way it handles any low-quality industrial fat. Slowly, inefficiently, and with biological consequences that do not announce themselves loudly, but build quietly across years of daily exposure. This is what slowly killing you looks like. A pantry staple, a health food aisle purchase, a label with an Italian flag and an olive branch on it. Research published in the NIH's National Library of Medicine confirms that chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind that builds silently over years from sustained exposure to pro-inflammatory dietary fats, is directly linked to cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and several cancers, not as a risk factor, as a documented biological mechanism. The oil in your kitchen is either slowing that process or feeding it. There is no neutral position. Here is the part that changes how you see all of it. Olive oil is not one thing. It has never been one thing. The reason medieval monks treated it like medicine is because real olive oil, pressed correctly and stored correctly, functions like medicine inside the human body. The compound responsible has a name: Oleocanthal. Researchers at the Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia identified it in 2005 and published their findings in Nature. What they discovered was this: Oleocanthal, a polyphenol found exclusively in fresh extra virgin olive oil, inhibits the same COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes targeted by ibuprofen, the same biological mechanism, the same anti-inflammatory pathway as a pharmaceutical drug. The lead researcher, Gary Beauchamp, first noticed it because fresh pressed olive oil produced an unusual stinging sensation at the back of his throat, the exact same sensation he had experienced while working with ibuprofen solutions years earlier. He brought the oil back to Philadelphia, they isolated the compound, and confirmed what the sensation had been telling him. Real olive oil contains a natural anti-inflammatory agent that works like a painkiller. Medieval monks applying oil to wounds were not operating on superstition. Roman soldiers receiving olive oil as part of their field rations were not being handed a luxury item. Benedictine monasteries, maintaining presses as medical infrastructure, were not confused about what they were producing. They were using empirical observation across generations to document what the oil actually did without the vocabulary of biochemistry and without needing it. Now, here is the critical piece. Oleocanthal is fragile. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry in 2023 confirmed that heating olive oil at 180 degrees Celsius for just 60 minutes reduces oleoeuropin, one of the key polyphenols, by 99.3%, nearly complete destruction. Studies on the refining process show that high heat and chemical solvents used in industrial olive oil production strip away most of the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds entirely. Cold press extraction, which keeps temperatures below 27 degrees Celsius, preserves them. Industrial refining does not. And so, the oil the monks were pressing within hours of harvest, using stone mills stored in sealed clay vessels away from the light, was biologically active, potent, and full of the compounds that made it worth protecting for centuries. The oil in your kitchen went through a process designed to maximize shelf life and yield, not biological activity. The healing components were not lost by accident, they were processed away. And here's how deliberate that process is. The refining method used on most commercial olive oil involves heating the oil, treating it with chemical solvents to maximize extraction yield, then deodorizing it to remove the bitterness and peppery finish that would otherwise signal its quality. That bitterness, that throat burn, those are not flaws. They are the taste of oleocanthal activating. The industry removes them because mass-market consumers find them unpleasant, and in doing so, it removes the only biological evidence that the oil was ever real. In medieval Mediterranean economies, olive oil was not treated like a grocery item. It was treated like currency. The Roman Empire formalized this with the Arca Olearia, a dedicated commodity exchange that traded olive oil with the same institutional seriousness as silver and grain. When Rome fell and that infrastructure collapsed, monasteries rebuilt it from the ground up. They maintained production records, managed grove revenues, tracked harvest yields across seasons, and traded oil across regional networks with the precision of a counting house. In 13th century Tuscany, the largest olive oil producers were not merchants. They were monasteries and fortified farms. Institutions with survival depended on producing something real because the people who depended on it had no alternative. The people who treated olive oil this way were not doing it for the flavor. Purity was a survival requirement. A farmer who adulterated his oil was not cutting corners on a commodity. He was removing the one substance his community used for wound care, fever management, and the nutritional density that carried people through winter without a pharmacy on the corner. The consequences were immediate and visible because the distance between producer and consumer was short enough to make dishonesty dangerous. Now, here's the modern version of that math. According to the CDC, chronic diseases and mental health conditions account for 90% of the nation's $4.5 trillion in annual healthcare spending. 6 in 10 American adults have at least one chronic disease. 4 in 10 have 2 or more. The Partnership to Fight Chronic Disease projects that between 2016 and 2030, the cumulative cost of chronic disease in the United States will reach $42 trillion. The average employer health insurance cost for an employee with a chronic condition is 5 times higher than for an employee without one. A quality bottle of real, certified single-origin extra virgin olive oil costs between $25 and $40. It lasts a household roughly 3 months when stored correctly. That is approximately $10 to $13 a month for an ingredient that, according to a 2024 study published in JAMA Network opened by researchers at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, tracking 92,383 people over 28 years, was associated with a 28% reduction in the risk of dying from dementia when consumed daily in amounts as small as half a tablespoon. Compare that to what Americans spend managing the consequences of chronic inflation. The CDC estimates that arthritis alone costs over $300 billion annually in medical expenses and lost earnings. Alzheimer's disease and other dementias cost an estimated $360 billion in 2024, projected to reach nearly $1 trillion by 2050. Your health is your wealth. Every bottle you pour is either an investment in what your body can do or a slow tax on it. The medieval trader who paid premium prices for real oil and the modern American paying $4.5 trillion a year to manage the consequences of not doing so are separated by 1,000 years and the same fundamental choice. The medieval farmer could not afford to pour something useless into his body. The numbers are now available to show exactly how much you are paying to do otherwise. Now, that cost did not just suddenly appear overnight. It was built one compromised bottle at a time, and the industry that built it understood exactly what was going on. The bitterness was the problem, not for your body, but for their business model. Mass-market consumers in taste tests consistently preferred the smoother, more neutral oil. They chose the product that had been deodorized and stripped rather than the one that stung the throat and left a bitter finish. The industry followed the preference. It optimized for what sold, not for what worked. And in doing so, it built a global market around a product that looks like olive oil, pours like olive oil, and registers in your body like any other refined industrial fat. A 2023 study published in the journal Nutrients, drawing on data from over 11 years of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, found that pro-inflammatory diets were significantly associated with higher all-cause mortality and higher cardiovascular disease mortality across thousands of participants. The researchers were not measuring dramatic dietary differences, they were measuring the cumulative effect of daily choices that individually seemed small and collectively determined outcomes. 8 of the 10 leading causes of death in this country are chronic diseases. The researchers who study these numbers consistently point towards sustained dietary inflammation as a primary driver. Not the only driver, the primary one. Real olive oil with intact polyphenols sits at the anti-inflammatory end of that spectrum. Refined, adulterated, deodorized oil sits considerably closer to the other end. The label will not tell you which one you are holding. Your body, across years of daily exposure, already knows. There is a specific kind of intelligence that comes from having no safety net. Medieval communities could not outsource their health decisions to a label or a certification logo. When the monk at the press in the 12th century Umbria decided how long to let the olive sit before pressing, when he chose clay over wood for storage, when he kept the press room cool and the vessel sealed, he was not following a wellness trend. He was operating on centuries of accumulated observation about what the oil did to people when it was done right and what happened when it was done wrong. Here is one detail that rarely gets mentioned. Roman soldiers received a ration of olive oil as standard military supply. Not wine, not grain only, oil. Specifically because Roman military commanders had observed over centuries that soldiers who used it consistently recovered faster from wounds and maintained better physical condition in the field. That is not some kind of folklore. It is documented Roman military logistics. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD in his encyclopedic work Naturalis Historia, documented olive oil's role in maintaining the physical condition of Roman athletes and soldiers. He noted specific applications for skin protection, muscle recovery, and wound treatment. Pliny was not writing poetry. He was compiling the practical knowledge of an empire that had been observing the oil's effects on human bodies for centuries. That documentation predates the Monell study by roughly 2,000 years and arrives at the same conclusion. We have something those soldiers never had: clinical trials, molecular analysis, peer-reviewed biochemistry that can tell us exactly which compounds matter and exactly which processes destroyed them. We have mass spectrometers and double-blind studies and accredited laboratories in 3 countries, all pointing to the same conclusion about what real olive oil is and what industrial processing does to it. We have every tool they lacked. And the majority of people are still pouring fraud into their skillets every morning, convinced they are eating Mediterranean. Modern convenience made a trade. It offered shelf life, consistency, and low prices. In return, it took biological potency. It took the compounds that 3,000 years of medical tradition had identified as the reason the oil was worth using in the first place. It gave you a smooth, inoffensive, neutral-tasting oil that pours easily, stores indefinitely, and does almost nothing for your inflammation levels. Here is another detail worth sitting with. In 2012, industry analysts estimated that less than 10% of world olive oil production met the criteria required to legally carry the extra virgin label. Yet, up to 50% of retail oil globally was labeled extra virgin. That gap is not closed. It has widened as global demand has increased, and honest producers have found it harder to compete on price with fraudulent product. The medieval farmer never needed a biochemistry degree to make the right choice. The oil was local, the harvest was recent, the press was stone, the result was real. He had no infrastructure for ignorance. We built that infrastructure ourselves and called it progress, and the cost of that progress is invisible until it's not. Chronic inflammation does not send you a bill. It shows up as fatigue your doctor cannot fully explain, as joint pain you attribute to aging, as a body that recovers slower than it used to, and nobody connects it to the oil you have been pouring every day for the last 20 years. The medieval farmer never had that problem. He could not afford the kind of slow, invisible damage that comes from trusting a label over his own senses. So, here's where it leaves you. Start reading the harvest dates, not expiration dates. A bottle without a harvest date is telling you something important about what that producer thinks of your ability to ask questions. Look for dark glass. Look for single origin oils that name a specific grove or cooperative. Look for certifications from the California Olive Oil Council or the Australian Olive Association, both of which apply stricter testing than EU label requirements allow, and taste it. Real, fresh, pressed, extra virgin olive oil has a distinct bitterness and a peppery finish that makes you cough slightly at the back of the throat. That sensation is oleocanthal. That is the anti-inflammatory compound the researchers at Monell identified in 2005 and published in Nature. If your oil goes down smooth or leaves no impression, what you are tasting is the absence of everything that matters. One more fact before you go. Independent certification bodies test oils after they reach retail shelves, not before. meaning a bottle can pass at the producer level and still degrade before it reaches your kitchen if it was stored in clear glass under light for months. The harvest date tells you when the clock started. The dark glass tells you whether anyone tried to stop it. A bottle without both is a bottle that was never meant to be held accountable. The medieval farmer did not know the word polyphenol. He didn't need to. He knew that real oil from real olives pressed with real hands within hours of the harvest healed things that nothing else could touch. We traded that knowledge for a 2-year shelf life and a $12 bottle with a fake Italian label. A monk in the 12th century Umbria pressing his harvest at dawn and sealing it in clay by nightfall was doing more for his body's long-term health than most people in the most medicated, most hospital-dense civilization in human history are doing today. That is not a historical curiosity. That is an indictment. Take control of what goes into your body. Start with what you pour, because the damage does not start at the hospital. It starts in the kitchen, and so does the way back.